There was a time when the world was not mapped, when the horizon was not a boundary, but a question. Ships moved slowly across vast oceans, guided only by wind, stars, and instinct. There were no guarantees, no certainty of return, only the quiet understanding that once the land disappeared, everything would change. This is not a story of heroes or great battles, but of ordinary sailors, and what life was really like, far from land, far from certainty, and surrounded by nothing but sea. The shoreline was still visible, but only just, a thin line separating what was known from what was not. The village behind it had already begun to fade into the distance, its shapes softened by the morning haze. Small houses, narrow paths, the quiet rhythm of life on land, all of it remained behind. On the wooden deck of the ship, there was no turning back. The air felt different here. It carried the scent of salt, sharper than anything found inland. The wind moved freely, unobstructed, brushing against faces and clothing with a steady, restless motion. It did not pause, it did not settle, it simply continued. For those standing aboard, this was the moment. Everything began to change, suddenly, but undeniably. The ship itself moved with a rhythm, unlike anything on land, a slow rise, a gentle fall, then again, over and over, guided by forces unseen beneath the surface. Each movement subtle, yet constant at first. It required attention. Balance had to be learned, steps adjusted. The body reminded that this was no longer solid ground. There were no roads here, no fixed direction, only water, stretching outward in every direction. The sailors did not speak much. There was no need. Each person understood the weight of departure in their own way. Some stood quietly, watching the shore disappear. Others turned away sooner, choosing not to follow it with their eyes. There was no right way to leave, only the act itself. The sails above shifted gently, catching the early wind. Their movement produced a soft, steady sound, a low, constant whisper that blended with the rhythm of the sea. Ropes tightened, wood creaked. The ship responded as if alive, adjusting itself to the changing air and water. Everything worked together, not perfectly, but sufficiently. Below deck, the space was close, low ceilings, rough, wooden beams, the faint smell of salt mixed with something heavier. Something lived in. This was where time would be, spent when the weather turned, when the sun disappeared, when the sea demanded more than calm. But for now, most remained above, watching, waiting, adjusting, to a world that did not stay still. The shoreline grew thinner, less defined. What had once been familiar began to lose its detail. Fields became patches of color, buildings became shapes. Then, slowly, they became nothing at all. Only the horizon remained, a wide, uninterrupted line where sky met sea. There was a quiet realization in that moment, not spoken but felt. The understanding that what lay ahead was unknown, not in a dramatic sense, but in a quiet, steady way. There would be no certainty here, no predictable paths, only distance, only time, and the constant presence of the sea. For many sailors, this was not their first journey, and yet, each departure felt the same, because no two journeys were ever identical. Sea did not repeat itself. It shifted, changed, responded. Two forces far beyond human control. Experience could guide, but it could not guarantee. Still, there was a sense of purpose, a reason for leaving. Trade, exploration, duty, or simply the need to continue moving forward. Each man carried his own reason, though few spoke of it. Work began almost immediately. There was no long period of adjustment. Tasks needed to be completed. Ropes checked, sails positioned. Every movement had meaning. Every action contributed to the ship's progress. There was no room for distraction. Only focus, only repetition, only the steady continuation of what needed to be done. Time passed differently at sea. Without landmarks, without the familiar structure of life on land, it became something less precise, less measured. The sun marked the day, the fading light marked its end, but the hours between felt longer. Stretched, carried by the slow movement of the ship. Some looked out across the water, searching for something to rest their eyes upon. But there was little to find. Only waves. Endless, shifting, repeating. Their movement was calming, but also isolating, a reminder of distance, of separation, of the space that now existed between the ship and everything that had once been known. And yet, within that distance, there was also a kind of quiet, a stillness that did not exist on land. No crowded paths. No constant voices, only the wind, the water, and the occasional sound of wood responding to pressure. It was a different kind of world. Not better, not worse. Simply different. As the sun climbed higher, the last trace of land disappeared completely. There was no line left to follow. No shape to recognize, only open sea. In every direction. The journey had begun fully now, not marked by a single moment, but by the absence of what had been left behind. The sailors moved with more certainty as the hours passed. Their bodies adjusting, their balance improving. What had felt unfamiliar began, slowly, to feel natural. Not comfortable, but manageable. Routine would come later. For now, there was only transition, the space between leaving and becoming accustomed, a quiet stretch of time where everything felt slightly out of place, and yet entirely real. As the ship continued forward, carried by wind and current, the world of land faded completely from memory, replaced by something else, something vast, something patient, something that would define the days to come. The sea did not welcome them, but it did not resist. It simply existed. Endless. Unchanging in its presence, though never the same in form. And within that vastness, the sailors found themselves moving forward, away from everything they had known, and into a life that would be shaped, moment by moment, by the rhythm of the open water. By the second day, the absence of land was no longer surprising. It had become expected. The horizon remained unchanged, a continuous line that followed the ship wherever it moved. There were no markers. No signs of progress. Only the steady motion forward, measured not by distance, but by time. Life aboard the ship began to settle into a pattern, not a rigid schedule, but a rhythm shaped by necessity. Each person had a role, each role had its place, and every action, however small, contributed to the continuation of the journey. Morning did not begin with noise. There were no bells, no sudden calls. Instead, it arrived gradually, as light spread across the water and filtered onto the deck. Those who had rested rose quietly. Those who had remained awake simply continued. Time at sea did not separate itself as clearly as it did on land. It flowed. Without sharp edges, without clear beginnings or endings. The deck was rarely still. Even in calm weather, there was movement. Sailors walked carefully, their steps adjusted to the shifting surface beneath them. Hands reached instinctively for ropes, rails, anything steady. Balance was no longer something they thought about. It had become part of them. Work was constant, though not hurried. Sails needed to be watched, adjusted. As the wind changed, ropes tightened or loosened. Knots checked and rechecked. Nothing was done once and forgotten. Everything required attention. Below deck, the space remained dim. The air was heavier. Here, less movement, less light, but it served its purpose. It provided shelter, a place to rest when rest was possible, a place to retreat when the sea grew less forgiving. The smell was always present, salt. Wood, and the lingering presence of many lives sharing a small space. It was not unpleasant, but it was inescapable. Above, the sea stretched endlessly. Its surface was never truly still. Even in calm moments, small waves moved beneath the ship, lifting and lowering it in a gentle, repetitive motion. This rhythm became familiar, something to resist, but something to accept. It shaped how people stood, how they walked, even how they thought. Food was simple. Measured. Distributed with care. There was no abundance, only what had been brought aboard. Bread that grew harder with time, dried meat, water stored in barrels, guarded closely. Each portion mattered. There was no waste. Meals were quiet, not out of formality, but out of habit. Energy was preserved where it could be. Conversation, when it happened, was brief. Practical. Focused on what needed to be done. The sea did not demand silence, but it encouraged it. There was a sense that words carried less weight here, that the vastness around them made speech feel smaller, more contained. Moments passed with no conversation at all, only the sound of wind moving through sails, the creak of wood adjusting to pressure, the steady, rhythmic contact of water against the hull. These sounds replaced what had once filled the air on land. They became the background of existence. Constant, unchanging, yet never exactly the same. There were times of stillness, moments when the wind softened, and the sails hung with less tension. The ship moved more slowly, then its progress barely noticeable. These moments required patience. There was nothing to be done but wait. Allow the sea and the air to decide when movement would return. Sailors did not fight these pauses. They accepted them as part of the journey. As part of the nature of the world they had entered. At other times, the wind returned with quiet strength, filling the sails once more. The ship responded immediately, leaning slightly, moving forward with renewed purpose. These changes were not dramatic, but they were constant, a reminder that control was always shared. Never absolute. The sky above became as familiar as the sea below. Its colors shifted throughout the day. Soft tones in the morning, brighter light at midday. Then warmer shades as the sun began to lower. Each change marked the passage of time in a way that required no measurement. Only observation. Clouds moved slowly, sometimes gathering, sometimes dispersing. Their presence hinted at what might come, but never with certainty. The sailors watched them. Not with anxiety, but with awareness. Everything at sea required awareness. Not fear, not urgency. Just attention. As the days passed, the distance from land became less important. It was no longer something to think about. The focus shifted inward. To the ship. To the people aboard. It to the tasks that needed to be done. Life became smaller in scope, but deeper in experience. Each action mattered. Each moment had weight, because there was nothing unnecessary, nothing extra, only what was required to continue. And in that simplicity, a kind of clarity emerged. There were no distractions, no excess, only the steady presence of the sea, and the quiet understanding that this was now the world they moved through. Not temporarily, but completely, at least for the time ahead. And as the ship continued its journey across the open water, carried by wind and guided by hands that had learned to adapt, life settled into its new form, unfamiliar at first, then slowly, quietly, becoming something that felt almost natural. As the days at sea continued, one reality became impossible to ignore. Everything that sustained life had been brought aboard from the very beginning. There would be no fields to harvest. No markets to visit, no fresh supplies waiting ahead. Only what had been carefully stored before departure, and what remained of it. Food was not something taken for granted. Here it was, measured. Watched. Considered in a way that was quiet, but constant. Each meal was not simply about hunger, it was about time, about how long the journey might last. About how carefully each portion must be preserved. The supplies were kept below deck, stored in barrels, crates, and sacks that lined the dim interior. Bread, baked before departure, had already begun to change. What was once soft had grown firm, then harder still. It did not spoil immediately, but it did not remain the same. Each day altered it slightly. Dried meat hung or rested in sealed containers, salted to endure the long journey, its flavor strong, its texture dense. It provided what was needed, but little more. Water was the most carefully guarded of all. Stored in large wooden barrels, sealed tightly. Its presence was essential. Without it, nothing else mattered. Each sailor knew this, though it was rarely spoken. Rations were distributed in measured amounts, not generous. Not insufficient. Just enough. Enough to continue. Enough to maintain strength without risking the future. There was no room for excess. Meals were simple. Bread, meat, water. Sometimes little else. There were no spices. No variety. No change from one day to the next. At first, this was noticeable, the repetition, the lack of difference. But over time, it became expected, even accepted. Hunger adjusted, desire faded. What remained was need. The act of eating became functional. Quiet. Focused. There was no lingering over meals. No extended conversation. Each person ate what was given, then returned to their place. Work did not pause for long. It could not. The sea allowed no such luxury. Below deck, the conditions affected everything. The air was warm. Still. The movement of the ship carried through the structure, shifting everything slightly. Barrels creaked, crates adjusted. Nothing remained entirely fixed. Food had to be checked regularly, ensured it had not been damaged, that it remained usable, because once it was lost, it could not be replaced. There were small challenges that appeared over time, not dramatic, but persistent. Bread that broke apart more easily. Water that no longer felt as fresh. Subtle changes that reminded everyone of time passing. Of supplies diminishing. These were not causes for panic, but they were never ignored. Awareness was constant, always present in the background of thought. Some sailors adapted more quickly than others. They learned to eat slowly, to make each portion last, to find satisfaction not in quantity, but in continuation. Others took longer, their bodies still expecting more, still remembering life on land, but eventually, all adjusted. They had to, because there was no alternative. The sea did not provide, it demanded preparation. And respect for limitation. There were moments when the routine of eating felt almost steady. Predictable. A small point of consistency in a world that was otherwise always in motion. These moments were not celebrated, but they were felt quietly as something reliable. Something that did not change, even as everything else did. Occasionally, there were small variations, a different portion, a slight change in distribution, not enough to alter the experience, but enough to be noticed. These moments stood out, not because they were significant, but because they were rare. The body responded to them instinctively, recognizing difference, however small, and then returning to the familiar pattern once more. Drinking water carried its own rhythm. Measured. Deliberate. There was no waste. Each sip mattered, each drop accounted for. The barrels were not opened freely. They were managed, observed, protected, because within them was the continuation of life itself. As the days extended into weeks, the awareness of survival became more subtle. Less immediate, but no less important. It settled into the background, part of the rhythm of daily existence, like the movement of the ship, like the sound of the sea. Always present, always influencing, even when not directly noticed. Hunger no longer came as sharply. It arrived gently, a reminder rather than a demand, and was answered in the same way, quietly, without urgency. That this was not abundance, but it was enough. Enough to sustain. Enough to continue. And at sea, continuation was everything. There were no guarantees beyond that. No certainty of what lay ahead, only the understanding that each day required care. Attention. And the steady use of what had been brought from the world left behind. So, life aboard the ship moved forward, sustained not by variety or comfort, but by careful balance. By restraint, by the quiet discipline of knowing that survival was not found in having more, but in making what remained last just long enough. The first signs were easy to miss. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The sea still moved as it always had. The sky stretched wide above the wind, continued its steady presence, but there were small changes, subtle shifts that did not demand attention, yet quietly invited it. The air felt heavier, not in a way that could be explained. But in a way that could be sensed. The horizon lost some of its clarity. The line between sea and sky softened. Clouds began to gather. Slowly. Without urgency. They did not rush across the sky. They formed layer by layer, a quiet accumulation that suggested something was changing. Sailors noticed, not with alarm, but with awareness. They had seen this before, not once. But many times. And each time, it began in much the same way. Preparation did not come with shouting. There were no sudden commands, only small adjustments. Sails were checked more carefully. Ropes tightened with greater attention. Movements became more deliberate. Each action carried a quiet understanding. Behind it, this was not routine, but it was familiar. The wind shifted. At first, only slightly. A change in direction, difference in pressure against the sails. The ship responded immediately, tilting just a little. Its movement no longer as smooth. No longer as predictable. The sea followed. Waves grew. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Their rhythm changed, less gentle, more insistent. The ship rose and fell with greater force. Each movement a reminder that control was never complete. The sky darkened, not suddenly, but steadily. Light faded behind the growing clouds. The colors of the day softened, then disappeared, replaced by shades of gray, then deeper, tones, then something heavier still. Sound began to change. The wind no longer moved quietly through the sails. Pushed, stronger now, more direct. The sails responded with tension. Ropes strained. Wood creaked. The ship spoke in new sounds, sounds that had always existed, but now carried more weight, more urgency. Rain did not arrive. Immediately it waited, as if allowing everything else to prepare first, and then, without warning, it came, not gently. But with force. Water struck the deck, the sails, the faces of those above. Visibility narrowed. The world became smaller, contained within the space of the ship itself. Beyond it, everything blurred, everything uncertain. Movement became difficult. The deck, already unstable, turned slick. Each step required focus. Each motion calculated. There was no room for distraction. No space for hesitation. The ship rose higher now, then dropped. Not gently. But with a force that could be felt through the entire body. The rhythm that had once been familiar was gone, replaced by something unpredictable. Something that could not be anticipated. This was no longer adaptation. This was endurance. Voices, when they were used, were brief, not because speech was forbidden, but because it was unnecessary. Everyone understood. Everyone knew what needed to be done. Fear was present, but it did not appear in the way it might on land. There were no visible signs. No panic. No outward expressions. It existed quietly, held within a steady awareness of risk, of uncertainty. Of the limits of control. Hands moved, quickly, but not chaotically. Ropes were secured. Sails adjusted. Anything loose was tightened. Anything exposed was protected. Every action mattered because every action had consequence. The sea no longer moved beneath the ship. It struck against it. Wave after wave. Each one different. Each one unpredictable. The ship responded as it could. Rising. Falling. Turning slightly under pressure. Always adjusting. Always reacting. Time became difficult to measure. Moments stretched, then disappeared. There was no clear sense of how long the storm had been building. Or how long it would last. Only the present remained. Only the next movement, the next wave, the next task. Below deck, the experience was different, but no less intense. The sounds above carried through the structure, louder now. Closer, the movement more violent. The space felt smaller, more confined, but it offered some protection, some distance from the full force of the storm. Even so, nothing was untouched. Everything moved. Everything shifted. The storm did not need to be seen to be understood. It made itself known in every possible way above. The rain continued. The wind pressed harder. The sea showed no sign of slowing, and yet, within it all, there was a strange consistency, a pattern within the chaos. Not something that could be predicted, but something that could be endured. Sailors did not try to stop the storm, did not fight it. They worked with it, around it, through it. Because resistance was not an option. Only response, only adaptation. And so, they continued. Not with confidence, but with experience. Not with certainty, but with understanding that this was part of the journey. Not an interruption, not an exception, but something expected. Something inevitable. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the intensity began to shift. The wind softened, not entirely, but enough to notice the waves, still powerful, lost some of their force. The rain eased, becoming less constant. Less overwhelming. Sky remained dark, but lighter than before. These changes were small, but they were enough to suggest that the storm was passing, not suddenly, but gradually. The ship continued to move, still affected, still responding, but no longer overwhelmed. And as the storm receded, leaving behind its presence in every creak of wood and every drop of water on the deck, a quiet understanding settled. Once more over those aboard. Nothing had been said. Nothing needed to be said. They had endured, not by strength alone, but by knowing when not to resist, and when to simply continue. Night at sea did not arrive all at once. It came gradually. The light faded in slow, almost unnoticeable steps. The sky shifted from brightness to softness. From warmth to something cooler, then deeper, until the final traces of daylight disappeared beyond the horizon. And with it, the world seemed to change. the sea remained. The ship continued forward, but everything felt different, smaller, quieter, more distant. The horizon, once clear and constant, vanished entirely. There was no longer a line separating water from sky, only darkness, layered and endless above. The first stars appeared, faint at first, then more, then countless. They filled the sky in a way that could never be seen from land. Unobstructed, undisturbed. A vast expanse of light against darkness. For sailors, these stars were not only something to observe, they were something to understand, to follow. They provided direction, a sense of place in a world where nothing else offered certainty. But beyond their function, they also brought something quieter, a presence, a reminder of scale. Of how small the ship was. How small each person aboard it was. Set against the vastness above and below. The deck at night was different from the day. Movements were slower, more careful, not only because of the darkness, but because the world itself felt more delicate. Sounds carried further, the creak of wood, the soft movement of rope, the steady rhythm of water against the hull. Each sound was clearer, more defined. There were fewer distractions, fewer movements, fewer voices. Conversations, when they happened, were softer, shorter, often unfinished, not out of discomfort, but because silence felt more natural, more appropriate. Below deck, the darkness was complete. There was no sky to reflect even the smallest light, only the enclosed space, the presence of others, and the constant motion of the ship. Rest came in fragments, not long stretches of uninterrupted sleep, but shorter moments, broken by movement, by sound, by the shifting awareness that came with being at sea. Even in rest, the body remained alert, attuned to the rhythm of the ship, to any change in its motion, to any sound that did not belong. Time lost its structure here. Without clear markers, it became difficult to separate one hour from the next. Moments blended together, stretching into something continuous, something without clear beginning or end. Above, the stars continued their slow movement across the sky, almost imperceptible, yet constant. Sailors, who remained awake, watched them, not always with intention, but with quiet attention. Their patterns became familiar, their presence steady. In a world without fixed reference points, they offered something stable, something reliable. The sea at night was not silent, but it felt quieter, its movements less visible, its presence more abstract. Waves still rose and fell. The ship still responded, but much of it was felt, rather than seen. This changed the experience, made it more internal, more reflective. Isolation became more noticeable at night, not because others were absent, but because the world beyond the ship disappeared. Were no distant lands, no signs of other life, only the vessel, and the endless space surrounding it. This isolation was not always uncomfortable. For some, it brought a kind of calm, a distance from everything left behind, a simplicity that was difficult to find elsewhere. But for others, it carried weight, a quiet awareness of separation, of how far they had traveled, of how far they still had to go. These thoughts were not spoken, they did not need to be. They existed beneath the surface, present, but controlled, because life at sea required focus. Even at night, especially at night. The air cooled as the hours passed. The wind softened at times, then returned. Never entirely still, always. Shifting, the ship continued its movement, uninterrupted, guided by forces that could not be seen, only felt. There were moments when the sky seemed almost endless, when the number of stars made it difficult to focus on any single one, when the darkness felt deeper, more complete, and in those moments, time seemed to slow, as if the journey itself had paused. Even though the ship never stopped, never hesitated, always moving forward. Gradually, the sky began to change again, so subtly that it was easy to miss. A slight lightening at the edge of the horizon, a shift in tone, darkness giving way to something softer. The stars, still present, began to fade, one by one, until only a few remained. Then, none. Morning did not arrive with sudden brightness. It returned slowly, just as night had come, bringing with it the familiar shapes of the ship, the clear line of the horizon, the visible movement of the sea. And with that, the world expanded once more. What had felt small and contained during the night opened again, returning to its daytime, form, but something remained, a quiet trace of the night, a memory of stillness, of isolation, of the vastness that had surrounded them in darkness. And, as the cycle continued, as day followed night, and night followed day, the sailors carried that experience with them, not as something separate, but as part of the journey itself, a reminder that beyond the tasks, beyond the movement, beyond the visible world, there was always something larger, something unseen, something that could only be understood in silence. By the time many days had passed at sea, something within the sailors had begun to change, not suddenly, not in a way that could be clearly seen, but gradually, quietly, like the shifting of the tide beneath the surface. The journey was no longer new, the routines were no longer unfamiliar. What had once required thought now happened without it. Movements became instinctive, reactions immediate. The body had learned, and the mind had followed. But beyond the physical adjustments, there was something deeper taking shape, a different kind of understanding, one that did not come from instruction or explanation, but from experience itself at sea. There was no room for excess, no space for unnecessary thought. Everything had purpose, everything had purpose. Every action, every decision, every moment contributed to continuation. This simplicity began to influence how the sailors saw the world. What had once seemed important and faded, gradually, without resistance. Concerns that had once occupied the mind lost their weight, replaced by something more immediate, more essential. There was a quiet clarity in this, a narrowing of focus that did not feel restrictive, but freeing because within it, there was no confusion, no distraction, only what needed to be done, and the steady act of doing it. Endurance was not something that announced itself. It did not arrive as strength or determination. It revealed itself over time, in the ability to continue, to repeat the same actions day after day, without resistance, without questioning, not because there was no choice, but because the choice had already been made. Long before the journey began, each sailor carried that choice with them. Though it was rarely spoken, it existed in their presence, in their willingness to remain, to adapt, to endure. There were moments when the journey felt longer than expected, when the horizon seemed unchanged, when time stretched in ways that made progress difficult to feel. In those moments, purpose became less clear, not lost, but distant, something remembered rather than experienced. These moments were part of the journey, just as much as the calm days, just as much as the storms. They required a different kind of strength, not action, but patience, the ability to remain steady when nothing appeared to change, to trust in movement that could not be measured, to continue without visible reward. This was endurance in its quietest form. There was no recognition, no acknowledgement, only the continuation itself. And yet, within that continuation, something formed, a deeper connection to the journey, a sense that the experience itself held meaning, even if that meaning was not fully understood. The ship became more than a vessel. It became a world contained self-sufficient, defined by its boundaries. Everything within it mattered. Everything outside, it was distant, abstract. This perspective shaped how the sailors saw themselves, not as individuals separate from the journey, but as part of it, connected to the movement, to the rhythm, to the shared experience of those around them. There was a quiet unity in this, not expressed through words, but through action, through presence, through the understanding that each person depended on the others, not in obvious ways, but in ways that were constant, subtle, essential. Trust was not declared, it was assumed, built through repetition, through consistency, through the absence of failure. Over time, this trust became part of the foundation of life, at sea. Invisible, but always there. There were no moments of triumph, no clear markers of achievement. The journey did not offer such things. It offered only continuation, only the steady movement forward. And yet, within that movement, there was a quiet sense of progress, not measured in distance, but in endurance, in the ability to remain. To adapt, to continue. This was not a journey defined by destination alone. It was defined by what it required of those who undertook it, by what it revealed, by what it changed. Each day contributed to that change. Each moment added to it, slowly, almost imperceptibly, until the sailors themselves were no longer the same as when they had begun. They carried the experience within them, not as something separate, but as part of who they had become. The sea had not taught them through instruction. It had shaped them through presence, through repetition, through the quiet demands of survival and continuation, and in that shaping, something enduring remained, something that would not disappear when the journey ended, because it was no longer tied to the sea. It was part of them, a quiet understanding, a steady awareness, that whatever lay ahead, they had already learned how to continue. There was no single moment that marked the end of the journey, no clear signal, no announcement, only a gradual realization that something was changing. Once again, it began in small ways, subtle differences that were easy to overlook. The air carried a different quality, faint at first, barely noticeable, but present. The sea, though still vast, seemed to shift in character. Its rhythm felt less endless, less isolated, as if something beyond it was beginning to draw closer. The horizon, once empty and unchanging, held a quiet possibility, not yet visible, but no longer unknown. Sailors did not speak of it immediately. They noticed, they understood, but they did not rush to define it, because at sea, certainty came slowly, and assumptions were rarely trusted. Time continued, as it always had, measured, not in hours, but in experience, in repetition, in the steady continuation of movement. And yet, beneath that continuity, there was a growing awareness that the journey, as it had been known, was approaching a transition, not an end, but a change. One morning the difference became visible. At first, it was only a faint shape, a break in the line where sea met sky, so slight that it could be mistaken for a cloud, but it did not move. It remained steady, unchanging, and slowly, as light grew stronger, its form became clearer. Land, distant, but undeniable. The sight did not bring sudden celebration. There were no raised voices. No outward expressions of relief. Only a quiet shift in attention, subtle change in how the sailors looked outward toward something that had not been present for so long. Presence of land altered everything. Not physically. The ship still moved the same. The sea still carried it forward. But perception changed. Distance, once abstract, became measurable again. Direction, once guided only by sky and instinct, now had a visible point. The world expanded, not in size but in meaning. For some, the sight of land brought a sense of closure, a quiet confirmation that the journey had purpose beyond itself, that there was somewhere to arrive, somewhere to step beyond the boundaries of the ship. For others, it carried a different feeling, not relief, but reflection. A recognition that something was ending. Not the journey alone, but the experience of it, the simplicity, the clarity, the rhythm that had defined each day. On land, things would be different, more complex, less contained. The quiet structure of life at sea would give way to something broader, less predictable in its own way, and perhaps, in some ways, less clear. As the ship moved closer, the details of land emerged. Shapes became defined, colors more distinct. The line between sea and shore sharpened. What had once been distant became real. Tangible. The air carried new sense. Subtle. But unmistakable. Different from the salt and wood that had filled each day. These changes were small, but they were enough to mark transition, enough to signal that the journey, as it had been lived, was no longer the same. And yet, even as land approached, the habits of the sea remained. Movements continued as before, tasks completed with the same care. The rhythm did not break because it had become part of them, something internal, not dependent on the environment, but shaped by it. The final approach was not rushed. There was no urgency, only continuation, as there had always been. Step by step, moment by moment. Until the distance closed and the journey shifted fully into something new. For those who stepped onto land, the ground felt different. On Movian, stable in a way that required adjustment. The body, accustomed to constant motion, noticed the absence of it. Balance changed. Perception shifted. The world felt still, yet somehow more complex. Sounds returned. Voices. Movement. Beyond the ship, life that extended in all directions. Not contained. Not limited. For a moment, it could feel overwhelming. After so long within the defined space of the vessel. But beneath that, something remained. Something quiet, something steady. The experience of the sea. It did not disappear, it did not fade, it did not fade, it stayed, carried within each person who had made the journey. not as memory alone, but as understanding. That is a way of seeing, a way of moving through the world. And for some, the journey did not end at land. It simply paused, a temporary transition, before the next departure, because once the sea had become familiar, it never fully released those who had learned to live within it. And so, whether they remained on shore or returned once more to open water, the sailors carried with them something that could not be set down, a quiet endurance, a steady awareness, an understanding of movement, of stillness, of isolation and connection, all shaped by the time spent between horizon and sky. And as new journeys began, or old ones were remembered, that understanding remained, not as something distant, but as something present, something that continued, long after the voyage itself had come to an end.